So yesterday, there was this woman who was making comments under one of my posts, and she was telling the story of how she left her husband. I jumped in her inbox and I was like, look, you're going to have to flesh this out. Can you type up a story time? And she's like, sure can. I'll make the Cliff Notes version because the ADHD likes to ramble on about all the tiny details. She says, I met my now ex husband in 2010 after a very violent failed relationship that led me to leave the state of Arizona to get away from constant stalking and harassment. Yep, I do have a pattern of dating and marrying horrible men. I was 32 and he was 35. We had both been previously engaged to other people. I had no children. He had a 14-year-old daughter. When we first started dating, he just instantly wormed his way into my life very quickly. He'd be constantly at my house every single day. Sadly, I was super codependent and had no idea, so I thought his love bombing was normal. After a year of dating, he asked me to move in with him. 6 months after we moved in, he convinced me to move my mother in with us. She lived in Arizona, and sadly, she was my childhood abuser. Looking back, that was a sneaky way to manipulate me into staying with him and ignoring his red flags because I'd be so focused on mommy dearest abuse. On my 34th birthday, he proposed. He conned me into not having a wedding and getting married at a local in and out kind of church for $100. Future faking that we'll have a wedding the following year. His anxiety was too much for him to handle at the time. Keep in mind, so far, we've already seen love bombing, we've seen future faking, we've seen how he has deflected and used her mother as a way to hide his red flags. There's so much going on and so much that you can learn. She had a childhood abuser, and maybe that kept her having some rose colored glasses, and she didn't know that this behavior was red flags. She says, 8 months later, I borrowed one of his cars to go to work because my battery was dead. On the drive to work, I was T-boned on the driver's side. I was I was knocked unconscious and had to be cut out the car. When he met me in the ER, I was suffering from shock and still strapped onto the board because I hadn't been evaluated. He came into the ER screaming at me that I had ruined his car. Mind you, he had already totaled said car and rebuilt it once before. Not a word said asking if I was okay, not a single thought about my well-being. I knew I was effed and screwed from that day on out. After that, I basically just disassociated and roboted my way through a horrible, abusive job, an ever increasing, horrible home life for a few more years. Eventually, he convinced me to quit said abusive job because I was away from the house 12 to 15 hours a day. He owned his own business that would come to a standstill every year during the winter, so my income would keep it afloat during those months and also keep the bills paid at home. Eventually, I couldn't take the job anymore. Turned out between the accident and the series of horrible bosses, I had PTSD and I quit my $90,000 a year job that provided us with really good health insurance. Within a month of me quitting, my typical monthly bills are due, and he asked me, how are you going to pay your car payment? I was in shock at that question because he stated many times that he will take care of me, but I guess that somehow didn't mean financially. Prior to me quitting, it was always our money. After I quit, it became his money. I was suddenly a deadbeat gold digger in less than a month's time. So I started working a small online business and was eventually making $12 to $15,000 a year while also volunteering for a local dog rescue. I did everything I could to keep my mind busy and away from my home life. Over the next couple of years, I eventually started working full time for the dog rescue, and my job took up 12 to 15 hours a day once again. I honestly think I was just trying to escape being a slave to my ex husband via work. When we met, his house was super clean. His laundry was always done and put away. So it seemed like I wouldn't have to mommy him like in previous relationships. Boy, I was so very wrong. After we married, very slowly he stopped doing his laundry, cleaning up after himself, and leaving garbage all over the house. He was like a tornado ripping through the house 24/7, and he fully expected me to cook and clean up after him 24/7. On top of that, out of the blue, he'd randomly accuse me of cheating as I got home from work 5 minutes later than usual, or I'd come home from the grocery store. That would trigger a huge fight because not only was I working more hours in literal oil fields in the desert heat, but I was the only one cooking and cleaning while my mother would pick apart everything I was doing as wrong. Man, she got a lot going on. She says, Q 2020 and my first bout of COVID hits. Within 3 months, I woke up one day and couldn't walk. My face and joints were all stiff and painful and swollen. It was terrifying. He didn't believe I was sick or in pain at all. He accused me of faking it for attention and being lazy because I couldn't pick up after a grown man for a few months. It turned out that COVID triggered lupus, and I was tortured with awful meds that had horrid side effects like prednisone, that is just awful on its own. After 4 months of trying to deal with lupus, I was laid off of my job, which infuriated him even more. It turned into outright hatred that I was no longer his mommy slave. Daily, he'd come home just to rage, scream at me for being a worthless lady of the night because all of a sudden he's claiming I'm cheating on him again. Mind you, I could hardly walk, shower, feed myself during this time, and didn't even leave the house unless it was for an in person doctor's appointment. His cheating delusions got worse by the day, and my health kept deteriorating. I finally realized how much he hated me and only liked what free labor and money I provided to him the whole time. It was a serious gut punch to the soul. I started saving up my unemployment, and he had no access to it at all. I also started socking away cash here and there because I knew if I was to survive him, I'd have to plan to leave without him knowing. By January 2021, I had a plane ticket purchased to Cleveland from SoCal to visit my sister for a month. He thought it was a good idea, but a week before I was to leave, he physically attacked me because he heard a male neighbor's voice on the Ring camera and said I obviously had a man in the house cheating. There was nobody coming or going on the Ring camera, and his excuse was that that I was a master hacker and deleted any evidence of it. I left him that night and I hid at a former coworker's house before I flew out. I left with nothing but a carry-on suitcase and a handicapped two-legged dog. It took till November 23 to be fully divorced. I had an ace in the hole because I did all of the business accounting and he had two sets of books, the real income versus the IRS reported income. I made sure to email myself copies before I left him. He ended up paying for my moving costs to Ohio, a lump sum payment because he financially cut me off of our joint bank account that had $130,000 in it when I left. And he agreed to pay 5 years of $2,500 a month alimony in the end because he did not want the IRS coming after him. I was not afraid of the IRS and three hots in a cot after what he put me through. My outcome is not typical and is rather rare. I was one of the lucky few who made it out alive and got some sort of repayment for the 12 years of hell. Sadly, it's taken 3 hardcore years of EMDR therapy at the cost of $35,000 to repair the CPTSD damage both he and my mother caused. They were two birds of a feather. So I was like, where's your mother now? Did they stay together? She says, oh crap, I forgot to say. She had a stroke and was diagnosed with vascular dementia in 2019. So on top of all that, I was caring for my demented mother. I put her butt in a group home before I left him, and she passed in March of 2023. I was the only one with her when she died. Oh, and they absolutely hated each other because they were the same kind of person. Both had NPD. This last part, she says, oh, I forgot to add, he was totally projecting the cheating onto me because he had been cheating with his ex prior to me for years and with men at the gym. Apparently, men's locker rooms are notorious cruising spots. She says, thank you for letting me tell my wild story. And thank you for sharing what all the forms of abuse look like so more of us can avoid the trauma before we end up married or pregnant. I so wish we had this kind of information back when I was a teen and being groomed by adult men at high school parties. it would have saved so many of us. But we didn't know what we didn't know. And I'm so glad people like you are sharing our stories. I take my role seriously. I am so appreciative that people are willing to share their stories with me so that I can share them with you. So many things stem from our childhood. Y'all heard she say that her mother was abusive. So imagine why she wanted to get out of her mother's house and what she was willing to put up with in the form of what she perceived as a safer location to stay at or a safer relationship to be in versus being with her abusive mother. That's one of the real reasons why mothers have got to be better to their daughters so that we don't end up trying to run away from our home life and end up leaving the fire, ending up still in the frying pan. So please take care of your relationships with your children. Don't have kids that you're not ready to have. Work on healing, work on your traumas and all of that before getting into relationships, because you really could be running into somebody that would be physically and mentally and financially abusive, like what this woman has gone through. I'm thankful that people share their stories. Look out for the love bombing, look out for the future faking, look out for the physical, mental, and financial abuse, because that's all part of this particular woman's story. But we're trying to raise awareness so it doesn't have to be a part of your story. All right, let me know what you think. Don't forget to like, comment,